Hello, I'm Ann Doyle. I'm the author of Powering Up, How America's Women Achievers Become Leaders. And I've been invited here to Google's headquarters in Ann Arbor to participate in your authors, is that what you call it? Kind of an authors forum, which I really appreciate. I'm a Michigan person, and I'm a graduate of the University of Michigan, so this is kind of home here in Ann Arbor. But I'm going to talk just a little bit about what the book's about, what motivated me to write it, and what I hope really a reader will get out of picking this book up. And then I would love you to ask me some tough questions. I was a journalist for 15 years and made a good part of my career. I made a pretty good living asking really difficult questions, so I hope you'll do that. And I'll begin by, I guess, saying that I am a woman who I'm been a professional woman for 40 years. And so I have seen tremendous change in my adult lifetime in terms of what's happened in the workplace in terms of women. And so, and because I was a woman who was really part of that generation that was really on the cutting edge in terms of pushing the edges of women moving into really non-traditional jobs, I did those things myself, and I also was a journalist who covered all of that. And so I really was very, very close to what happened and how far we've come as women, and also really conscious about how far we still have to go. And so I really got to a point in terms of, after all this period of time, where people said to me, Ann, you really ought to write a book. Because my background includes 15 years as a journalist, where 5 years I spent as one of the first women TV sports broadcasters in the nation. So I helped to open the locker rooms in this country, the sports locker rooms. And so I call that a leadership laboratory, where you're tested in some pretty tough environments. Then I spent second part of my career was at Ford Motor Company, and the auto industry has a pretty famous steel ceiling, as I call it. So, I have the corporate experience of understanding what it takes to for women to raise that ceiling, which are still very much in place in the corporate environments. I'm also a single parent. I have a 19-year-old son. I would call parenting a leadership laboratory. His father died when he was very, very young, so I pretty much raised him by myself. And then the fourth piece of really what I bring to this conversation is I ran for office last year. I've always been out there encouraging women to run for office. We do not have enough women running for office, and I'm part of something called the White House Project, which is training. We plan to train 35,000 women by 2014 to run for office. And someone finally said to me, Ann, you're always telling everybody else to run, why don't you stick your own neck out there? So I did that too. So I bring all of that experience to this conversation. But when I finally decided that I was going to write a book, I knew that it shouldn't just be a memoir. This is not a memoir. I have some pretty great stories, and my stories are woven through this book. But I knew that this country at this point is really just loaded with incredible women who can match me story for story. And so I put on my journalist hat and I went looking for the story. What's the story now? In 2011, what's the story now? And I interviewed 125 of the most incredible women, leaders from all different professions, from all different generations, all different races and cultural backgrounds, not only from the United States, but also from other parts of the world. And the question I was asking women in other parts of the world was, what's your message for American women? Because this is really about women, how women become leaders in our culture. But I wanted the global perspective on that. And so the good news is that I could have gone on interviewing incredible, high-achieving women for years. I mean, this country has become a nation of women achievers, and it's happened in my adult lifetime, and it's really incredible to see. And there are now three very, very distinct generations of high-achieving women in the workplace today. And I write a chapter about each one of these generations because we're very, very different. And I think it's really important that we start to understand each other because there's a lot of dissonance between women. We're not helping one another. And so we're there in big numbers. But the story is that even though we've become this nation of high-achieving women, we are leadership underachievers. And some people really bristle at that, you know. But, I mean, the facts are just devastating in terms of proving that story. And we hold an average of 18% of the leadership positions in every work sector. Now, it has been 20 years since men earned more college degrees than women in this country. And that's a whole other topic about what's going on with men. But women have been earning more college degrees for 20 years. They're earning more graduate level degrees, and they just cracked more PhDs. So women are incredibly qualified, and the middle keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And it was very clear to me that women today are, too few women are going anywhere that women haven't been before. And I really felt, and I would say we've been stalled for at least 10 years, maybe more. And there's sort of an unconsciousness about it in terms of the importance of big numbers of women moving up into those leadership positions. And because I have the experience as a woman who, women of my generation who really moved into those non-traditional jobs, we have first all through our resumes. And we were all alone when we were doing it. But we also knew we were part of something bigger than ourselves. And so we knew that we were like moving women forward in this country. And we were. There's no sense of that right now. I just don't see enough women daring to take the risk that it takes to lead. And so that's what this book is about. That's what, when I became very clear about what the story was, is that we needed a book about graduate work on what it takes for women who are high-achieving women, highly educated, have mastered the fundamentals of being successful, but really needed almost like a field guide of what's the graduate work? What do you do now? What's next? If you really believe your leadership material, what do you start working on? What are the skills that you need to have? And that's what this book is about. And those were the questions that I was asking women. I have over 100 hours of transcribed interviews with some of the most incredible women. And one of the women right now, Major General Maggie Woodward, is the person who is in charge of the United States air operations over Libya. She made news a couple of weeks ago because never before has a woman commanded such a military operation. And those were that's the level of women that I had access to. And you know, after a while, when you start doing all these interviews and you start asking, you know, because I wanted to know, what do they know? I knew what I know. I knew what I had learned over 40 years, but I really wanted to go hunting for. I knew there was a tremendous amount of knowledge out there, and I wanted to know, what did they know? What did they know that I didn't know? Or what did they know that we could pass on? So that other women wouldn't have to learn it one by one. You know, I want women to go faster. I want more women moving into higher levels, aspiring higher, and I want them to go faster than we did. And so that's really what I was looking for. And that's how I came up with the second half of this book. I mean, is the 7 practices. I call it the 7 practices. You've all heard of Stephen Covey and his 7 habits of highly effective people. Well, these are 7 practices that I say that high achieving women who believe they are leadership material, this is what you need to master next. And I didn't just make these up. As I said, they come from my experience, but they also come from the themes that came through over and over and over again in these 100 hours of transcripts. interviews that I did with incredible women. And I listed all the women in the back of the book, so that you can read and see, who these women are. And also on my Facebook fan page, which is called Powering Up Women Book. But you can just Google it because it's you can Google it because it's because I love how that's become a verb. Yeah. Because it's a public site now. But I'm posting pictures of all these women, so that you can see what they look like. And I'm asking these women to give me not only like a professional picture or kind of an office picture or headshot, but I said, give me an action picture. Give me a shot of you doing your work, or with your family, or something that kind of shows somebody a little bit more about you. And so you can look it up. They're right on the fan page, and you can see Commander General Maggie Woodward with her paratroopers. She's a pilot. That's her training and everything. Right. In all their flight gear in front of the plane, and those kind of cool pictures. So I listed all of them. But I will, I guess I'll just mention, and then I hope we can kind of have a conversation here. I divided the book into three major parts. And the first part is, who are we? Part one, who are we? And that's where I basically make my case that the first chapter is so many achievers, where are our leaders? And that's where I make my case about where we are right now. And then I have a chapter on each of these three distinct generations of women, of high-achieving women. And these are really subsets of the generations. We talk about baby boomers and Gen X's and new millennials. And I'm talking about a subset of those groups. I'm talking about women, and I'm talking about aspiring women. And that means women who are educated, usually. They don't have to be, but, or lucky enough to be, these aren't women who are struggling to survive, usually. These are the women lucky enough to be in positions to start shaping our nation, our culture, our organizations. And so I divide them into three groups, and I name them. And nobody else has ever done this before. I really named these cohort groups. And I call them the interlopers. That's my generation. I call them the pioneering interlopers. And if you know the definition of interloper, the dictionary says it's someone who imposes herself or himself where they're not wanted or in others' business. So, when I was imposing myself, insisting on, as a woman journalist, I should have equal access to sports locker rooms as the men were going in there, I was an interloper. And so these women were very much in situations like that. So I call them the pioneering interlopers. And we're in our mid-50s and older now. Geraldine Ferraro, we're starting to lose some of our interlopers. Geraldine Ferraro, first woman ever to be on a national ticket as vice president of the United States on the Democratic ticket, just died, of course, pioneering interloper. The next generation are the women who are really kind of mid-30s up to early 50s, and they are, I call them the influential insiders, because they were very, very different from the interlopers. Because while the interlopers needed certain skills to, really we were like fighting our way in the door. Nobody wanted us. We were fighting our way in the door and ran into a lot of hostility even. And this next generation, and sometimes I call us the Marines. We had to put on our flak jackets, and really take some heavy fire right out of college. And so we are kind of the Marines of taking the professional beaches. This next generation, the influential insiders, I really call them like the diplomats, because they came next. And they were, by the time they got out of college and started moving into the workforce, things were changing. And the biggest thing that changed was there was room for one woman. They didn't have to fight their way in the door. They actually had, if they were good, the ones who are honest will tell you it was an advantage to be a woman. But there was only one woman. There was room for one woman. And so what happened was it pitted women against one another. You were competing with other women for the woman spot, the woman job. And so those women as a group tend not to be very supportive of other women. because they were their primary competition. The other thing about them, they're the I'm no feminist but women. You must have heard that a million times. I'm no feminist but. They ran away from the whole thing about feminism because by that time feminism had really been changed in terms of its definition in a lot of ways had been corroded and changed from what I understood it to be, and it really became the F word in corporate America. It became very dangerous. And the most successful, influential insiders were the ones who made it very clear to the work cultures they were in that they were not one of those troublemaking interlopers. And they got along. They're not boat rockers. And so that's characteristic of this group. And it's not a criticism, it's kind of like what they needed to do at that time. And they're the women who had the opportunity to play sports. They're post-Title IX. They had some chances to play sports, and I never had that chance. In high school and college, they're the first women to graduate from the military academies. And so they're more lawyers, more doctors, very, very different group. And a very important group. And now we come to probably most of you who are, I call you the I'll do it my way innovators. So we have the interlopers, the insiders, and the innovators. And I don't need to tell any of you about all the stuff that's been written about new millennials and what you know about yourselves in terms of, I look around the room and just look at the culture here at Google, which is, it's fascinating. It's great. And even the way you dress and the way you work and your expectations about how you should be able to work are very, very different. And I think it's really very exciting. And you are the most educated and ambitious generation of women in the history of the world. That's just a fact. And we American women are not ahead of women in other parts of the world, but there's several things that are different about us. Number one, we're lucky enough to be born into the United States, one of the most influential nations in the world, and where we have legal rights and cultural rights, opportunities that women all over the world just dream about. And so it's just given. And then the other huge piece of it is that there's so many of us. There's no other nation in the world, one nation, where there's so many highly educated, economically independent women in the world. And so the potential of what your generation can do, and also what these three generations of women can do in terms of shaping the world that we live in is incredible. And that's really what has inspired me, because I just see the table set. Table's just set. But I also am very discouraged because I see women standing at the gates of leadership and they're not pouring in. And it's really time for women to start pouring into top leadership the way I witnessed women pouring in to non-professional jobs in the 60s and the 70s. I saw it happen. I know what it feels like when you change a culture dramatically. And you don't change culture dramatically with exceptions to the rule. You do it with big numbers. And that's it's very much what I care about. I care about, and I feel very passionately, I know that the world will be a better place when women are also, our voices and our experience and our values are also at the table, shaping decisions that are being made. Because like right now, I kind of think of the human family is it's almost most parts of the world, it's kind of a single father making all the decisions, the mothers, in terms of mothering leadership at those decision-making tables, whether it's political, corporate, economic, cultural, all of those things, every piece that shapes our culture, our nation, our world, the decisions that are made, most of those decisions are being made by men. And you know what? That's imbalanced. There's some really important pieces that are missing. And I know we'll make better decisions when we get women, and women are ready to be there. So that's pretty much what my book is about. And one other thing I would say about this is that I like when I speak to women, I like to say, we're on a very steep learning curve. Because if you think about it, men have been bred for leadership for thousands of years. Thousands of years. And they have millions of models of men doing all these different leadership, taking all these different leadership roles in every possible profession there is. And women, number one, were blocked out of all that. I mean, it's all really very, very new in terms of cultural evolution. This is really pretty new stuff. We only got the right to vote in 1920 in this country. And really, I mean, women couldn't even, couldn't plan. There were no sports teams for women when I was growing up until, really mid-70s before they really started actually organizing some of that. And so, and then, you really didn't even have women moving into these being doctors and lawyers and judges and major, very visible journalist roles, all those kind of things. I mean, it's really new. It's really new. And so we are on a steep learning curve. But when you're trying to learn anything, the faster you can cut that learning curve, the better you're going to get at something quick. And so that's my book. That's and I guess I didn't mention, I should mention the 7 practices, right? Should I mention what those, I mentioned there's 3 generation, let me finish this and then maybe we can talk. That the book is divided into the 3 parts, about part 1 being who we are, and I talked about these 3 generations, kind of making the case about where we are, and then the 3 generations. Part 2 is just 2 chapters, and I call it Where Are We? And that's, one of them is called Why Girls Don't Rule, and that's a whole discussion of how women undermine ourselves and how we undermine one another. And then there's a very important chapter called What Do Men Have to Do with It? The answer to that, of course, is plenty. It's, men can be tremendously important allies, and they can also be blocks, And so that's a very important chapter. I had an incredible father. I'm one of 7 children. I have 3 brothers and 3 sisters. So I talk about my brothers, of course, in here. I'm also raising a son. And I talk about him, of course. And so, the whole role of fathers and brothers and husbands and bosses and colleagues. I mean, men are very much a part of this. So there's a whole chapter about that. And then the last half of the book are these, part 3, how I call it How Achievers Become Leaders. And that's these 7 practices. So my 7 practices are, the first one is discover your purpose. Discover your purpose, and that's where you get your passion, and that's where you get the energy, because leading is not easy. It's hard. So you first have got to find your purpose. And the second one is raise your voice. We've talked for a couple of decades about women finding their voices. It's time to raise our voices. And so that's the next chapter. Next one is break the rules. Of course, you can't start breaking the rules until you've mastered the rules of the game in the first place, but the leadership piece is having the courage to break the rules and knowing how to do it. The fourth one is claim power. This is basically about the fact that no one is going to give you power. I have this analogy that I use in my mind that I say, women are like these leadership wallflowers, that we are all dressed up, tapping our toes to the music, hoping somebody's going to invite us to the leadership dance. And I basically say, you know what? Nobody's going to invite you to the leadership dance. You have to claim power, and that means run for office yourself. Go for those jobs yourself. But also, women really need to encourage other women to do that too. We know that it takes women, there's plenty of research about this, we know that it takes women about 10 years longer than men to understand how good they are. I want to cut those 10 years. I mean, that's just, come on. I want them to get over that and start figuring it out earlier and start claiming power and going for those positions earlier. Next one is Drink at Dangerous Waters. That's all about taking risks, but it's also about getting out of your comfort zone, and it's about this whole global world that we're in, and developing the skills to work really well with and recognize talent in and build relationships with people who think differently from you, who are different from you, and it even means working with rivals and people you don't like, and it even talks about professional enemies in there. So Drink at Dangerous Waters is that one. And then the last two are Get Back in the Saddle. You can imagine what that's all about. That's about getting knocked down. Everybody gets knocked down. Everybody fails. I like to say, if you're not failing, and I mean really failing, not just little mistakes, I'm talking about really failing, you have no idea what your real abilities are. And so, you really have to fail. And what differentiates people is how fast they get up. How fast they get up and get right back in there. And get back in the saddle. And then the last one is a word that I coined. And it's called womaninity. And the subtitle of that chapter is Beyond the Girls and the Guys. But womaninity, I like to define womaninity as womaninity is to masculinity as Ms. is to Mr. Now, all of you just kind of take the word Ms. for granted. But I remember very well when we only had the choice of Miss or Mrs. And really, it defined a woman immediately in terms of her relationship to a man. It wasn't about just you're a male or a female, as a man is just a mister. I mean, there's nothing about, are you married, are you single, what. And so the word Ms. came into usage. And, I know plenty of women of my age who were mocked in law schools, publicly mocked in classrooms if they wanted to use Ms. instead of Miss to be identified. So that was not an easy thing, but now it's just common. But it's very important because it just basically defines you as a female. And so there is no word that's parallel to masculinity, because femininity, when you look that up in the dictionary, it's really all about the very softest parts of women. And it even says it's the opposite of masculinity. So if we think of masculine meaning a man is strong, courageous, well, what's the opposite of that? Weak and fearful? Femininity does not work in terms of defining the qualities of a fully evolved woman. And that's why I came up with womaninity, because I'm basically saying that, it's really time. When I started learning to lead and those kinds of things, pretty much my only role models were men. There really were not a lot of women that I could look to pattern myself after to see what worked. And a lot of women my age, we made a lot of mistakes, and we found out that you're never going to be able to lead the way a man does, because we're not men. And so if you try to do that, you're really going to be criticized for it. It's not going to work. And so we're really just developing this whole enough examples for us to look at of, okay, well, how does a woman, a fully evolved woman, lead? And a big piece of that is being very, very comfortable in your own, relaxed in your own skin, but also really tapping into the natural innate strengths of our gender. And we know the two genders have very different real strengths that we're learning about our brains and differences between us now. And so that's what womaninity is all about. And then, of course, the epilogue is really just a call to action. It's just, I really am encouraging, trying to teach, pass along what I've learned from my research and experience, and then I'm daring women to lead. So that's my book. So I'd love any of your thoughts. I'd love to have a conversation or any questions.
Are there any themes? You said you talked about these really powerful, successful women. Were there any commonalities between them? It's something that sort of they all seem to have the same mindset or?
Yeah, absolutely, and that was why, I mean, when you do 100 hours of transcripts and you start looking for themes, and that was how I finally came up with these 7 practices, because that was really built on these themes, and I actually started out with a list that I also sent out to several hundred women of just bullet points of what I thought were qualities that maybe were leadership qualities, and I said, hey, prioritize these, what's missing from the list, add things to the list, take things off. And so all the women I interviewed filled those out for me, but also I had a couple hundred more that also filled those out for me. And then I just started counting them up and, seeing which ones came up over and over and over again. And I'd say in answer to that question, Lily, a couple of really most important things. The biggest piece is confidence. I mean, confidence. It all comes down to that. And the faster we can get girls to develop confidence at an early age and then get them to keep it through those really tough adolescent years where girls tend to lose it completely. You're laughing because you remember maybe, right? Yeah, anything we can do to, and that's that piece about taking women usually about 10 years longer than men to figure out how good they truly are. And that's cultural. It's cultural muck that women have to fight their way through. And so confidence is huge. And another piece, and so confidence is related to courage. It's related to raising your voice. It's related to drinking in dangerous waters. It's related to how do you handle setbacks. It's related to every single one of these. Confidence. And that's almost like the clay, the building material that you need. It's the fuel. I would even say confidence is the fuel. It's one of the most important ones. The other thing that came up as a theme over and over again was this whole issue of women not supporting other women and women undermining other women. And every single woman I interviewed said something along these lines. Oh, that's huge. That's huge. And in my speaking that I've done so far about this book, the most questions that I get are about that. And I like to say, I use a great Madeleine Albright quote in here that at the beginning of one of the chapters that says there's a special place in hell for women who don't support other women. I believe that. Now, and I pretty much divide women into 2 categories, and I make a decision pretty quickly about it. When I meet somebody, I'm thinking, okay, are you a woman who supports and aligns with other women, or are you a woman who separates yourself from and undermines other women? If you are in that second group, I have no time for you. I have no time for you. I don't care what your job is. I don't care how much money you have. I don't trust you, and I'm not going to put any energy into sharing my network with you. I'm certainly not going to follow you as a leader, etc., etc. And I want to make this clear for maybe men who are watching this, of what I'm not saying, because somebody might say, well, gee, men don't support one another. Well, yes, they do. And I think that the language is different because men understand no matter how competitive they are with one another, men understand very well that they need to align with one another and help one another. And what do you think the Good Old Boys Network is all about anyway? What do you think the Optimist and the Rotary and the Lions and the Elks that women had to sue in order to get their way into those organizations were all about? They were about men coming together and helping one another and their networks. Why is it that Augusta National Golf Course, where no women are allowed to join, and it's so prestigious for CEOs to be members of that club? They really don't get to the club that much to play golf there. It's about the network. It's about them being part of a network and having access to other very powerful men. So men absolutely do this, and women have not learned how to do this yet. And it's very, very important, because I like to say to women, you know what? You're never going to be one of the guys. You are never going to be one of the guys. And you need to get along well with men, work well with men, support men, all those kinds of things. But you're still never going to be one of the guys. And so your only natural other big group for those kind of alliances is other women. And women are starting to realize this, and there are starting to be networks of very powerful women who are at the top now, who've made a tremendous amount of money and are starting to align together to help younger women, to get equity capital, to younger women starting businesses, and things like that. So there are some things like this going on, but it's really important for women to stop undermining each other and start understanding that the only way we are going to make big changes is if we recognize our collective power. And other groups do this, and as I said, men have always done this in the professional world. Through all of history, men have done this. But on top of that, I mean, you see Hispanic organizations joining together, you see African American organizations joining together, you see Muslim organizations joining, you see many examples of this. But women still, I mean, when we begin to get it in terms of how much influence we can have collectively, if we start thinking about that, we're gonna just leapfrog ahead.